So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. Our first keynote speaker is Dr. Agnia Grigas. She is a senior research fellow at the Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C. She's an energy and political risk expert within the field of energy and foreign policies in the US and Eurasia. She just recently published a critically acclaimed book called The New Geopolitics of Natural Gas, and that is exactly the topic of today's presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Agnia Grigas.
Good morning. First, it's a real pleasure for me to be here in Copenhagen and in Denmark this morning. Actually, it's my second time in Copenhagen this year, so I'm starting to feel like a real local. And even more so, given that I took a brisk 30-minute walk to get here this morning, so I feel really local. It's also very exciting for me to be in Denmark today because Denmark has been an important country in natural gas development historically, and it's also center stage today in important decisions regarding European gas markets. So my talk today is on natural gas, as you've heard. Why natural gas? Certainly there are exciting developments in renewable energy, and here Denmark is a leader. There are also, the oil markets have also always been important. In my view, we are currently in a historical transition in the gas markets, something that could be comparable to what was experienced more than 100 years ago in the oil markets when they first went global. So my talk today We'll take a global perspective on the gas markets, particularly from also a geopolitical perspective. And of course, I will also bring in some views from Washington. So let's get started. My remarks will be based largely on my newest book, which was released by Harvard University Press just at the end of last year. And the book's starting point is really a focus on the transitions in the gas markets, and based on those transitions, and then I make arguments what I anticipate will be the changes in the political relations and geopolitical relations between the key importing and exporting states. So what are these market changes that I'm talking about? And I'm sure the audience in this room knows these market changes very well, but the ones I focus on in the book that I think are key is really the growth in LNG trade that we have been experiencing over the last 10 years, really probably since the Fukushima disaster, that really made the LNG markets global. Then, of course, the shale revolution, the North American shale revolution, that has unlocked, particularly for the United States, its unconventional oil and gas reserves, and that has established the United States now as a major energy producer. Another factor is really the greater interconnections, the buildup of gas interconnecting infrastructure, both across the world and also particularly in Europe. Pipelines, LNG import terminals, connectors, reverse flows, and so on. And then finally, but certainly not least, we have climate change concerns, which have been growing the appetite for natural gas. Both in Europe, both in the developed economies, and particularly in developing Asia, in the developing Asian economies. So all of these changes together point, in my view, to a globalizing gas market. And in fact, I think we can even call it a global gas market today, although here I'll say the academics still debate this point quite vigorously. But I think maybe we can be a little bit more free, and we won't get too upset about it if we call it a global gas market. And I think we're also seeing these changes are pointing increasingly to a buyer's market as well. So, coming to, well, the big elephant in the room, or what do we want to call it, the new energy superpower, as I call it in my work, it's the United States. The shale revolution really has established the United States as an energy superpower. It has created made the United States the largest natural gas producer in the world, surpassing Russia. And that is a very significant development. And we also see the United States emerging as a leader in oil production. So again, very significant developments for a country that not only has a vast demand for energy resources, and one that until recently anticipated to be importing a lot of its energy needs. So now, not only the United States anticipates to be self-sufficient, but it's also poised to be a leading LNG exporter. It started exporting liquefied natural gas in 2016 with these American cargoes going all over the world. And in a few years' time, the United States is expected to take third and then subsequently second place as the largest LNG exporter in the world. Again, dramatic changes in the United States. And of course, we see the leadership of the United States that is also very intent on using this energy diplomacy potential, whether we like the rhetoric or not. So just to give you a little glimpse here, currently the United States has 3 operational LNG export terminals, but I'm just giving you a snapshot of one region in Louisiana, just one region, which currently has about 10 projects in the works. I mean, of course, various stages of development, but 10 projects for LNG export terminals. So again, very significant, having gone from, well, since the 1960s, there was essentially just one LNG export terminal. Then in 2016, we had a second one open. This year, a third one, but 10 in the works just in Louisiana. And a lot of the focus now today in the media is about American LNG exports, their actual volumes, where they're going to go. Are they going to go to Europe? Are they going to meet Europe's demand? Are they going to go to Asia? But I would say what's maybe even more significant today is not just the actual volumes or exports of American LNG, but actually the impact of American industry, American gas industry on the global gas trade, particularly the way of doing business and the terms that American energy companies are prepared to offer. So particularly a move away from oil-linked gas pricing, move towards more hub-based pricing, and move away towards long-term contracts, towards more medium-term contracts, and even spot trading, short-term contracts, and so on. No destination clauses. Of course, that's something that has been already a regulatory factor in the EU, but the US is offering those conditions across the globe. And again, the growth of LNG versus piped gas. So all of these conditions and this way of, let's say, America's an American energy company's way of doing business, I would say also support the idea of a buyer's market currently. So this brings us to the other energy superpower, Russia, naturally. And also here I'll step in with my area of expertise is really global energy markets, and as well with a focus on Eurasian security issues. So I also work on Russian foreign policy. And I have published a couple of books on the subject. So from my perspective, and there are different ways we can interpret it, but has Russia been just simply a supplier of energy to Europe? Has it used it as a source of influence, as a source of political leverage, even has it used energy as a political weapon? Of course, I know this is a hotly debated topic. I would actually say all of the above. Russia has certainly used all of these tactics. So in some of the examples are, of course, as you see on the slides, gas halts, political gas pricing, price hikes, threats of gas price hikes, particularly towards countries that were highly dependent on Russian gas imports, countries where Gazprom generally had a monopoly or near monopoly. Also, gas has been for Russia not only a source of revenue, but I would say even more significantly, it has been a source of political influence and the basis for doing diplomacy, for establishing friendships, and sometimes a little bit even more than friendships. And so we see a few examples of European political leaders that have had very close relations with Vladimir Putin, oftentimes in relation to gas pipeline deals being made. So, of course, we see former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder and the infamous Nord Stream pipeline project. We see Berlusconi and Erdogan regarding the South Stream and Turk Stream projects in the past. And then we see more recent, Viktor Orban of Hungary also has a close friendship with Vladimir Putin and also has said he would love to see more Russian gas in Europe. So given what I had outlined earlier, with the US now being an energy superpower, the largest natural gas producer in the world, does that mean that Russia is a declining energy power? And here I would say a little bit, well, let's hold our horses. Russia still is the largest gas exporter in the world. It still holds that position. It certainly has vast resources. Though in terms of LNG markets, its position, it's been trying to ramp up that position, but it's coming from a catch-up phase. Let's say it's in a catch-up phase. So currently it's about number 7 in terms of LNG exports in the world rankings. Now Vladimir Putin has said that. Personally, he said he'll make Russia a number 1 LNG exporter. Now, of course, he didn't give a timeline for that. I'm maybe a little bit skeptical to see that in the very immediate term. But certainly, we will see Russian LNG becoming very competitive in Europe, I think really within the next year. And of course, there are plans for new pipeline projects. There are 2 important pipeline projects right now that Russia is pursuing. One is Nord Stream 2, and the second one is the Turk Stream project. I view both of these projects as an effort by Russia to hold on to the European energy markets. And if you look at these 2 pipelines and their trajectories, they also signal which markets are very important, of course, for Gazprom. So the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project goes directly to Germany, and Germany is in fact Gazprom's largest European gas importing market. Naturally, they want to pursue and maintain this market. In a way, I would say even lock it in, given the changes that we're experiencing in the global gas markets, the greater competition, the moves to LNG, and so on. This pipeline, again, is it just an exporter of natural gas, or is it an exporter of more? Friendships, political alliances, and even potentially corruption. I just came yesterday from Hamburg and Rostock. Rostock is the area where the Nord Stream 2 pipeline would be expected to land. And Germany is also watching Denmark's decisions very carefully regarding this pipeline. There, though, of course, they have the impression somehow that it's a done deal and Denmark could do nothing about this pipeline. Certainly that is not the case. I'm sure the folks in this room know that very well. There's still a lot of decisions to be reached, and there are a lot of problems with this pipeline and its implementation. Not least, of course, is America's position. And maybe we'll get a little bit more into that into the discussion, but I can say now that the United States is quite serious about potentially sanctioning this pipeline and thus the companies that are involved in this pipeline as well. Currently, there are 5 bills that have been passed between the Senate and Congress that all directly would implicate Nord Stream 2 into a type of sanctions, sanctions regime. So if even one of these goes into law, so you see there's quite a bit of appetite and quite a bit of bipartisan support in the United States for sanctions on this pipeline project. So the second one I touched on briefly as well. This is the Turk Stream pipeline. And Turkey is, for Gazprom, the second largest European gas market. And again, an effort to build, and of course a growing market for gas with a lot of demand. So there is also an interest to maintain this market as competition is heating up. And also Turkey then serves as a gateway to southeastern Europe, and these gas markets for Gazprom, this is where Gazprom still maintains a monopoly position in many countries. So in terms of energy diversification in Europe over the last few years, given these changes in the markets in terms of more liquidity, more competition, more LNG, we've seen some countries really grasp these opportunities. And I think some of the success cases are Poland and Lithuania, for example, that went from being 100% dependent on Russian gas and countries that had experienced numerous interruptions to their gas supplies. In fact, Poland, during the winter of 2008-2009, when Gazprom cut supplies to Ukraine, and because they're further downstream the pipeline, in that cold winter, they in fact even had citizens freezing to death because it was so cold. They had about 11 casualties. So you can imagine this is a highly sensitive political issue if you have your citizens experiencing casualties actually because of a gas halt. So Poland and Lithuania are countries that have built their own LNG import terminals. Lithuania, a floating terminal, a small-scale terminal to meet its rather small demand. And Poland as well. These are new developments, but the countries have already been importing Norwegian LNG, and last summer, the first cargoes of American LNG. So also that was maybe not so significant, perhaps from a market perspective. These were one-off deliveries, although subsequently Poland has signed a new gas deal for 20 years with an American supplier. But from a symbolic perspective, this was very important for these countries. Croatia is another case. There are plans for Croatia to build an LNG import terminal. We'll see how that goes through. Because Croatia was earmarked 100 million from the European Union of funds to build this terminal. But literally, as those funds were earmarked, Gazprom signed a 10 or 20-year deal with the local gas company to essentially meet all of Croatia's gas demand for the next 10 or 20 years, essentially eliminating, you can say, the appetite for this LNG terminal. Nonetheless, the terminal has significance beyond Croatia's local market because it would be a gateway from other southeastern European countries further down the line that don't have access to the coastline, the lovely coastline that Croatia has. So we'll see. This is an important project. We'll see how it goes ahead. Here, I'd like to discuss a little bit, because our focus was quite a bit on Europe, but on developing Asia, particularly China. There were a lot of discussions post-2014, really when there was a deterioration of relations between Russia and, Europe and the United States following the annexation of Crimea. And then with much, I would say, pomp, Russia made this type of a turn towards the east, a pivot towards the east and a pivot towards eastern markets. At the time, many discussed whether this even signals a political alignment or, a new kind of axis. At the end of the day, I don't put that much stock in it, though the Power of Siberia pipeline will open at the end of 2019 or roughly in that time period, and will start delivering Russian piped gas to China. We can see from those negotiations that really even those discussions that started almost a decade ago, that at the end it was Beijing that dictated a lot of those terms rather than Moscow. And China has a very well diversified and a very, I would say, thought out energy strategy, particularly based on, with a focus on their energy security. I think they've learned some of the lessons from Europe, from not to get over-dependent on any particular supplier. And in fact, in my book, I argue that they use their kind of power of demand quite well. So in fact, their vast demand puts them in a strong negotiation position. So of course, they'll have deliveries, piped deliveries from Central Asia, Myanmar, Russia, They will also import LNG from all over the world. They are also pursuing very aggressively their own domestic gas development program, both conventional and unconventional. In fact, they are one of the only 4 countries in the world today that have a commercial shale fracking program. So, I mean, that's the United States, Canada, Argentina, and China. And they have expanded vast amounts of money to pursue this shale program. And I would say, while many have been skeptical because maybe the results didn't quite match the efforts and the investments, still it's only a matter of time, given that it's such a political project for Beijing and such a necessity, that they will break through and they will be producing significant volumes from both their conventional and unconventional gas development programs. India, another country in developing Asia where really we can see the future of gas demand. Both China and India will probably be setting the future of global gas demand. Quite differently, I would say, than China, India hasn't had such a maybe carefully thought out and pursued a gas import strategy or gas program. For a long time, they didn't have a lot of the infrastructure, both internally for gas transit and gas imports. They're trying to ramp that up, but you can also see that from a different position, really, India had than China in terms of their negotiations. I would say a weaker position up until this date, though there are now new efforts to renegotiate in India and their GAIL company, their gas terms and gas import supplies. Of course, also a large importer of LNG in the years to come. So this new geopolitics of gas, and where I will put here the United States in the center front as this new emergent power, and of course with President Trump's proclaimed policy of energy dominance, and of course LNG diplomacy. This position, I think, sometimes raises some eyebrows and maybe some smiles in Europe, and I see that in the audience even as I say these words. But here you have to realize that, in fact, and also you can say today there's a lot of discussion, well, is America only potentially pursuing sanctions against Nord Stream 2 because they have their own LNG to sell? Is it only a new commercial interest? And here I would point that if you go back to the 60s, really as far back as the 60s, America's and Washington's position on this topic has been unchanged, very consistent, and in fact values-driven. So since the 1960s, the United States has been very cautious about its European allies becoming over-dependent on, well, at the time Soviet and subsequently Russian gas. Naturally, as NATO's largest power, and let's face it, as a security guarantor for a lot of the European states, the United States is directly implicated in the energy security considerations or risks of its allies. So again, since the 1960s, they've tried to dissuade their European partners from pursuing and importing Russian gas. In the early 80s, President Reagan sanctioned a pipeline that was being built at the time. The sanctions didn't go far. There was an economic downturn, and also the United States didn't have much to offer as an alternative. Again, looking since after the Cold War, the United States has supported projects like Nabucco, the Southern Gas Corridor. So it would bring alternative Caspian gas to the European Union. Again, not American gas, Caspian gas. It has also tried to dissuade Germany from building Nord Stream 1. But I think what has changed today really is the fact that the United States has gas exports, and it is no longer worried about its own supply. It has a surplus, and it can export that to its allies, not only in Europe, but also in Asia, many of which also tend to be energy import dependent. And even if we look at Asia, Japan historically, Korea, very energy and particularly gas import dependent countries. So here again, I would, as you raise your smiles and eyebrows at this new energy dominance and diplomacy, do consider that this has been a very long-standing American position. So given these changes in the energy markets, given, as I said, now importing countries have more options, there's more liquidity in the market, there are new players with, you can say, fairer perhaps terms like the United States, and potentially a buyer's market. So should we still be concerned about energy security or energy risks? And here I just put out some thoughts from a recent study I did from the Hybrid COE Center, which is a new center focusing on hybrid warfare risks that was recently opened in Finland by NATO and EU member countries. So in fact, risks remain, and in these globalizing markets, there's more infrastructure that we have to worry about, and more new infrastructure and their security. In the cyber and digital age, of course, there are more risks from state and non-state groups in terms of hackings or cyber attacks on our energy sector and our infrastructure. There's also the role of propaganda and information warfare that many of us maybe don't think about when we think about the energy sector. But we see it increasingly over the last, I would say, decade. I mean, there was one instance, for example, quite an interesting case in the United States, in the Columbus chemical plant, where there was a media type of operation, a false operation, seemingly connected to Russia, that argued that there had been an explosion in this chemical plant in the United States, and there were these types of messages in social media and so on, causing a public panic, essentially, in the region. So again, maybe we don't think of propaganda as something that's that important in the energy sector, but increasingly with social media and our digital information age, it can become at least a risk, or at least a source of concern for the public. Questions of corruption, a case that Denmark, I think, has recently been more focused on in terms of the Danske Bank case, cases for using energy for different interest groups, for foreign influence. So again, even though we're in an era of globalizing markets, greater liquidity, more supply, and better terms, we're really not in an era of post-energy security. So I will leave it at that, and I think we'll have a few questions, and I hope to get some questions from the audience. You can always reach out to me or follow me on Twitter, and I put up also some of my past work, my past books on the slides, so you get a little bit of an idea of my area of work. Thank you.